Let me be direct about what I'm explaining here. This is about an archaeological site in eastern Turkey. There's physical evidence. There's geological data. There's also a lot of silence from the people who've studied it. I'm going to walk you through what's actually been found, what the data says, and why researchers who went in expecting to disprove something are now refusing to talk about what they discovered. The simple version first. There's a ridge-shaped formation on a mountain called Mount Ararat in Turkey. It's about 515 feet long. It looks like a ship when you see it from the air. Local people in the valley below have called it the ship for centuries. Not because anyone told them to, because that's what it looks like to them. Now here's where it gets interesting. The book of Genesis says, Noah built an ark that was 300 cubits long. Convert that to feet using ancient measurements, and you get somewhere between 450 and 515 feet. That's not approximate. That's a direct match. Now I need to explain what that actually means before going further. A coincidence with numbers could mean many things. It could mean nothing. It could mean someone's math is backwards. It could mean the measurements were always designed to match. I'm telling you this because the next part makes more sense if you understand that the length alone isn't what convinced researchers. It's the combination of everything. Let me add detail now. In 1959, a Turkish military captain named İlhan Durupinar was flying a NATO reconnaissance mission. He photographed the formation from above. The image circulated among military analysts. Most people looked at it and moved on. One man didn't. His name was Ron Wyatt. He was a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee, with no formal archaeological training. He saw that photograph and made a decision that consumed the next 22 years of his life. Wyatt went to Turkey repeatedly. He collected samples. He took photographs. He claimed he found petrified wood. He said he found corroded metal fasteners. He described what looked like ship ribs pushing through the soil. He documented symmetrical, rib-like formations running along both sides of the ridge, exactly where a wooden hull's ribs would sit. He gave lectures. He wrote books. He died in 1999, still insisting he'd found what he came looking for. Here's the uncomfortable part. The academic mainstream mocked him almost entirely. They called him a crank. They dismissed his findings as wishful thinking. His critics were probably right to be skeptical of his interpretations. But I need to tell you something important that happened recently. Modern researchers brought professional-grade equipment to the same site. Ground-penetrating radar, three-dimensional imaging, advanced soil analysis. And what they found is not refuting Wyatt's essential claim about the formation. It's confirming elements of it. Now I'm going to add more detail because this is where the actual science becomes important. Ground-penetrating radar doesn't just tell you something is buried. It reads the shape of it. It reads the density. It reads the internal structure. It's like slicing through the earth with a blade and looking at the cross-section. When researchers powered up that equipment on the Durupinar Formation, the data started coming back almost immediately. The scans showed something that didn't look like dirt. It looked like architecture. The data showed long parallel lines running along the full length of the formation. Right angles appeared in the data. That's important because natural geological processes almost never produce right angles by themselves. The scans showed what appeared to be horizontal floors stacked one above the other, vertical divisions separating the interior into discrete enclosed spaces. The word the researchers kept using in their audio recordings was compartment. Whatever was inside that shape was divided into rooms. I need to connect this back to Genesis because this matters. Genesis doesn't describe Noah's Ark as a single open chamber. It describes 3 decks: lower, middle, upper, and rooms throughout the entire structure. Not a cargo hold. Rooms. The scans were pulling out data that matched that description with a precision nobody on site had expected to find. Here's what makes this more complicated. The radar team came to disprove this. That was the working assumption. They expected to find a geological quirk, a basalt formation shaped by lava flow and erosion, something that would explain away every rumor and let everyone go home. Instead, they were looking at 3 layered decks, divided into internal chambers, buried inside a mountain in the precise region the ancient text identifies as the place where the ark came to rest. Now, I need to explain the soil analysis, because this is where the evidence becomes harder to dismiss. When you have a structure on one part of a mountain, the soil should be basically the same as the soil on the surrounding slopes. The team did what careful researchers always do. They pulled samples from inside the formation's boundary and samples from immediately surrounding it. Then, they ran the chemistry side by side. The soil inside the formation was not the same dirt. Organic carbon levels were elevated well above what the surrounding terrain could account for. There was more decomposed plant and animal material concentrated inside the boundary than the surrounding geology had any mechanism to explain. The mineral profile showed iron oxides and metallic traces in concentrations that didn't match the surrounding bedrock. Even the vegetation told the story. The grass growing over the formation came in a slightly different color. It grew at a different rate. To me, what this means is simple. Something underneath that ground is altering the chemistry of everything above it. Wood, over sufficient time, leaves a specific signature in the earth around it. It releases carbon back into the soil. It changes drainage patterns. It affects what will grow above it and how fast. The chemical readings from the Darupanar formation are consistent with a massive organic structure that decomposed slowly in place over a very long period of time. I'm not saying that proves anything. I'm saying the data is consistent with that hypothesis. The team also found pockets of petrified material at multiple points along the formation's perimeter, material that doesn't match the volcanic rock composing the rest of the mountain. Samples were pulled and sent to a laboratory. One technician who handled those samples called a colleague that evening and said something he wasn't cleared to say. He said the material had originally been something that grew. He said he had stopped sleeping. He asked the colleague not to repeat it. The next morning, the samples were moved to a locked cabinet. The technician stopped returning calls. Now I need to add something else to this picture because it's unusual. There are other stones in the same valley, outside a village called Kazan. Large stones, roughly 40 feet tall, cut from basalt, weighing multiple tons each. They're standing upright in open ground, far from any quarry that could have produced them. There's no recorded ancient civilization in this region with any known capacity to move objects that heavy. Each stone has a hole drilled through it near the top, not a small hole, a hole large enough to pass heavy rope through. The local tradition holds that these are anchor stones. According to the valley's memory, they were dragged behind the ark during the flood to stabilize it against the surge of water. Now, that explanation sounds impossible until you understand what I found when I researched this. The stones are aligned in a line that points directly back toward the formation on the slope above. Several carry crosses carved into their faces. Those carvings date to the early Christian period. The stones themselves are considerably older. Nobody knows who made them. Nobody knows how they were moved. I'm going to add a critical detail here because this matters for context. There is no credible alternative explanation for why these specific objects with these specific holes are arranged in this specific valley, pointing at a boat-shaped ridge above. I've looked. Archaeologists have looked. Nobody has a better answer. That doesn't mean the anchor stone explanation is correct. It means we don't have a better one. Now, I need to explain something about flood narratives, because this is important for understanding why this site matters beyond the archaeology. The flood story doesn't belong to one tradition. It's not a Hebrew invention. It's not a Christian invention. It's not the property of any single culture or text. It is everywhere. Close to 200 separate cultures, spread across every inhabited continent on Earth, carry a version of the same memory. A catastrophic flood, a righteous survivor, a vessel, animals preserved, a world rebuilt from almost nothing. The Babylonians pressed their version into clay tablets thousands of years before Genesis existed in its current form. Their version describes a man named Utnapishtim who constructed an enormous boat to ride out a divinely sent deluge. The structural details and dimensions align with the biblical account in ways that are difficult to explain away as simple coincidence. The British Museum holds a tablet describing a circular arc built from reeds and bitumen, complete with engineering specifications precise enough that when researchers actually built a replica to scale, it floated. The ancient world was not only telling stories, it was preserving construction knowledge. The Hindu tradition records Manu warned by a divine fish building a vessel to survive the Great Flood. The Greeks had Deucalion, the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Hawaiians, Aboriginal cultures across Australia, indigenous nations of the Pacific Northwest. All of them carry this memory. The vessel changes shape, the names shift, the geography adjusts. But the core of the story holds across every version. The world drowned. A remnant survived. And the vessel that carried them came to rest on a mountain when the water finally fell. Here's what I think about this. You can call one culture's flood story a myth. You can call two of them coincidence. You can probably dismiss 10 without much discomfort. Dismissing 200 cultures, cultures with no contact with each other, separated by oceans and centuries, becomes a different intellectual exercise entirely. Something happened. The record is too consistent and too widespread to have been invented from scratch independently 200 times. That doesn't tell you what it was. It tells you that something was significant enough that nearly every human civilization felt compelled to remember it. Now I'm going to explain what happened when the team actually drilled into the formation, because this is where things shift into territory I need to walk you through carefully. No previous investigation had cut directly into the formation and sent imaging equipment inside it. The current team did. They selected drill positions based on where the radar maps showed the strongest structural anomalies beneath the surface. The process was methodical. Every bore site was chosen deliberately, cross-referenced against the three-dimensional subsurface maps the radar team had spent weeks building. Nothing was left to instinct. The drills went down through soil and compacted material, through layers that hadn't been disturbed in thousands of years. At a certain depth, the resistance changed, not gradually, suddenly. The drill bits surfaced, coated with a residue that didn't match the surrounding rock. Whatever the equipment had reached was not part of the mountain. It had never been part of the mountain. This is important because it means the structure doesn't follow normal geology. Then they sent the cameras down. Borescopes, narrow, high-resolution instruments with their own light sources, designed to transmit live feedback to monitors at the surface, engineered specifically for seeing into spaces that have no business being seen. The first images returned nothing but darkness and dust. Decades of settled particulate disturbed by the drilling, catching the light and scattering it back at the lens. The team adjusted. They waited. The focus sharpened. The cameras went deeper. At roughly 14 feet of depth, the lens reached something that stopped conversation in the tent entirely. A line of dark openings cut into the partition wall at irregular intervals, evenly spaced, each one approximately the same size, each one leading into another dark space behind it. The spacing was not random. It had the quality of intention, the quality of design, not gas pockets, not erosion damage. Openings, deliberately made. At 19 feet, the camera found what appeared to be a horizontal beam crossing the ceiling of the chamber. Dark, straight, showing the same compressed grain texture as the walls. Too straight to be a natural feature. Too long to be a mineral vein. It ran across the full width of what the camera could capture and continued beyond the edge of the frame on both sides. Whatever it was had been put there deliberately, placed with purpose. A very long time ago, the researcher beside him, the one who had spent 6 months informing journalists she was there specifically to debunk the site, the one whose institution had funded her presence as a counterweight to what they privately called wishful science, said 4 words aloud: undeniably constructed. Then she looked at the geologist, then back at the screen. Nobody else in the tent spoke. Nobody moved to write anything down. The audio kept recording. The camera kept transmitting. And whatever was at the bottom of that borehole kept existing, indifferent to the silence it had produced in the people above it. Here's what I understand about that moment. Scientists don't use words like undeniably constructed unless they mean something specific. They don't abandon professional language unless the thing they're looking at has moved them beyond professional language. The geologist's silence. The researcher's 4 words. The audio track recording breathing that changed. These are not the responses of people who have encountered a natural geological formation. These are the responses of people who have encountered something they were not prepared to encounter. Now, I need to explain why the project went silent. Because that's the part that makes this story important beyond the data. The full footage has not been released. What the team has said publicly is measured to the point of surgical precision. The readings are unusual. Further drilling is required. The site warrants further investigation. Every word in every statement has been chosen the way you choose words. When you know that other words, the real ones, the accurate ones, would detonate something you are not ready to detonate. They have not used the words Noah's Ark in any official capacity. Not once. Not in any press release. Not in any conference statement. Not in any peer-reviewed submission. But the silence around those careful words tells its own story. The same people who were giving weekly press updates have stopped issuing them entirely. The researcher who said, undeniably constructed in that tent has stopped giving interviews. She gave 3 in the weeks after the initial drilling, then 2, then 1, then nothing. Her institution has not explained why. Her colleagues will not say where she is. When journalists who covered her earlier statements attempt to follow up, they are redirected to communications offices that do not respond. The geologist has reportedly requested reassignment to a different project in a different country. 2 original survey team members have left the project without public explanation. Their names have been quietly removed from the project's official documentation. The petrified samples are sitting in a locked cabinet in an unnamed laboratory. The technician who handled them and called a colleague in distress that night has not spoken to the press. The colleague he called has declined every interview request. The samples have not been submitted for independent analysis. I want to be clear about what this silence means and what it doesn't mean. Institutions go quiet for mundane reasons all the time. Funding disputes, jurisdictional friction, bureaucratic caution. I'm not suggesting a conspiracy. I'm observing a fact. The people who were eager for documentary crews 6 months ago are refusing calls. An institution that was issuing regular updates has gone entirely dark. The deepest footage has not been shared with anyone outside the core team. Now let me explain what the next phase is supposed to be, because this is where it gets important. The next phase of investigation is already being planned. Larger bore openings, higher resolution imaging, capable of resolving finer surface detail at greater depth, direct surface sampling of the interior walls for carbon dating. That last step is the one that matters most. Carbon dating of the interior material would either close this question definitively or open it in a way that cannot be walked back. So here's what I understand now. The formation is real. The 515-foot length is real. The match to 300 cubits in Genesis is real, and it is not approximate. It sits at the precise upper boundary of the accepted cubit range. The radar is producing internal structure that standard geology has no convincing mechanism to explain. The soil chemistry fits the profile of a massive decayed organic mass in ways that are specific, replicable, and inconsistent with the surrounding terrain. The anchor stones in the valley below have no credible alternative explanation, not one that accounts for their size, their placement, their alignment, and their holes. Simultaneously, the people who have been pointing at that ridge for 5,000 years and calling it a ship have not changed their story, not once, not under any pressure. And the team that put a camera inside it has stopped talking. I think carefully about what that silence actually means, not the official silence. Think about the personal silence, the individual silence, the silence of specific human beings who went to a mountain in eastern Turkey expecting to disprove a biblical story and came back from it unable to speak about what they found in any normal professional register. That tells me something about what they saw.